Hi, welcome to Crime Busters 101. I post solved and unsolved cases and crime-related topics on a weekly basis, so if that's something that might interest you, please subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss our weekly uploads. This is the case of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer, an American serial killer and sex offender, was born on May 21, 1960. Between the years of 1978 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 17 males in truly horrific fashion. Rape, dismemberment, necrophilia, and cannibalism were all parts of his modus operandi. By most accounts, Dahmer had a normal childhood, however he became withdrawn and uncommunicative as he got older. He began showing little to no interest in hobbies or social interaction as he entered adolescence, turning instead to examining animal carcasses and heavy drinking for entertainment. His drinking continued throughout high school but did not stop him from graduating in 1978. It was just 3 weeks later that the 18-year-old committed his first murder. Due to his parents' unfolding divorce that summer, Jeffrey was left in the family home alone. He seized the opportunity to act on the dark thoughts that had been growing in his mind. He picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks and offered to take him back to his father's house to drink beer. But when Hicks decided to leave, Dahmer hit him in the back of the head with a 10-pound dumbbell. Dahmer then dissected, dissolved, pulverized, and scattered the now imperceptible remains throughout his backyard, and later admitted to killing him simply because he wanted Hicks to stay. 9 years would pass before he killed again. Dahmer attended college that fall but dropped out due to his alcoholism. After that, his father forced him to enlist in the army, where he served as a combat medic in Germany from 1979 to 1981. However, he never kicked the habit and was discharged that spring, moving back home to Ohio. After his drinking continued to cause problems, his father sent him to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin. By 1985, he was frequenting gay bathhouses, where he would drug men and rape them as they lay unconscious. Although he was arrested twice for incidents of indecent exposure in 1982 and 1986, he only faced probation and was not charged for the rapes. Stephen Twomey was his second victim, killed in September of 1987. Dahmer picked him up from a bar and took him back to a hotel room, where he woke up the next morning to Twomey's beaten dead body. He later stated that he had no memory of actually murdering Twomey, implying that he had committed the crime on some sort of blacked-out impulse. The killings occurred sporadically after Twomey, with 2 victims in 1988, 1 in 1989, and 4 in 1990. He continued to lure unsuspecting men from bars or solicited prostitutes, whom he then drugged, raped, and strangled. At this point, though, Dahmer also began carrying out particularly disturbing acts with their corpses, continuing to use the bodies for intercourse, taking photographs of the dismemberment process, preserving with scientific precision his victims' skulls and genitals for display, and even retaining parts for consumption. During this period, Dahmer was arrested for an incident at his job at the Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, where he drugged and sexually fondled a 13-year-old boy. For this, he was given a sentence of 5 years probation, 1 year at a work release camp, and was required to register as a sex offender. He was released 2 months early from the work program and subsequently moved into a Milwaukee apartment in May of 1990. There, despite regular appointments with his probation officer, he would remain free to commit 4 murders that year and 8 more in 1991. Dahmer began killing around 1 person each week by the summer of 1991. He became infatuated with the idea that he could turn his victims into zombies to act as youthful and submissive sexual partners. He used many different techniques, such as drilling holes into their skull and injecting hydrochloric acid or boiling water into their brains. Soon, neighbors began to complain about strange noises and awful smells coming from Dahmer's apartment. On one occasion, a lobotomized victim left unattended even made it out onto the street to ask several bystanders for help. When Dahmer returned, however, he successfully convinced the police that the irrational young man was simply his extremely intoxicated boyfriend. The officers failed to run a background check that would have revealed Dahmer's sex offender status, allowing him to narrowly escape his fate for a little while longer. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer lured Tracy Edwards into his home with the promise of cash in exchange for his company. While inside, Edwards was then forced into the bedroom by Dahmer with a butcher knife. During the struggle, Edwards was able to get free and escape out into the streets where he flagged down a police car. When the police arrived at Dahmer's apartment, Edwards alerted them to the knife that was in the bedroom. Upon entering the bedroom, the officers found the pictures of dead bodies and dismembered limbs that allowed them to finally place Dahmer under arrest. Further investigation of the home led them to find a severed head in the refrigerator, 3 more severed heads throughout the apartment, multiple photographs of the victims, and more human remains in his refrigerator. A total of 7 skulls were found in his apartment, as well as a human heart in the freezer. An altar was also constructed with candles and human skulls in his closet. After being taken into custody, Dahmer confessed and began divulging the gruesome details of his crimes to the authorities. Dahmer was indicted on 15 murder charges, and the trial began on January 30, 1992. Even though the evidence against him was overwhelming, Dahmer pled insanity as his defense due to the nature of his incredibly disturbing and uncontrollable impulses. Following 2 weeks of trial, the court declared him sane and guilty on 15 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 15 life terms, for a total of 957 years in prison. In May of the same year, he entered a guilty plea for the murder of his first victim, Stephen Hicks, and received an additional life sentence. Dahmer served his time at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. During his time in prison, Dahmer expressed remorse for his actions and wished for his own death. He also read the Bible and declared himself a born-again Christian, ready for his final judgment. He was attacked twice by fellow inmates, with the first attempt to slice his neck open, leaving him with only superficial wounds. However, he was attacked a second time on November 28, 1994, by an inmate as they cleaned one of the prison showers. Dahmer was found still alive, but died on the way to the hospital from severe head trauma. Softly spoken, handsome, and intelligent, Jeffrey Dahmer's boy-next-door facade concealed urges that eventually shocked the world. Between 1978 and 1991, the so-called Milwaukee Cannibal murdered 17 men and boys, committed necrophilia, consumed human flesh, and utterly lost himself in what he later described as a holocaust of his own making. These atrocities are familiar to true crime buffs, but here are some facts you may not have known about one of America's most terrifying serial killers. 1. He had his own fan club at school. Jeffrey Dahmer was in many ways a withdrawn and obsessive child. One of his favorite hobbies was to dissect animals and collect their bones. However, he was also known as a class clown at school and impressed other kids with his outrageous pranks. These included pretending to have seizures and fits, which was known among his peers as doing a Dahmer. Shadow blur of man were masked to prevent infection. Background: Dahmer and Nilsson, the sinister similarities. Jeffrey Dahmer did have a precursor in the form of another murderous necrophile jailed less than a decade earlier, Dennis Nilsson. Some fellow pupils were so tickled by Jeff's antics that they dubbed themselves the Dahmer Fan Club and actively encouraged him to take it further. Years later, when Dahmer's crimes came to light, it stunned his former classmates. John Backdorf, author of the acclaimed graphic novel My Friend Dahmer, explained, "It's like getting hit with a 2x4. Suddenly, all the goofball antics and silly things we'd done became completely sinister and troubling." Murder victim. Why were so many serial killers active in 1978? Looking back at 1978, the year serial killer murders went off the charts. 2. He performed zombification experiments. The grisly nature of Dahmer's murders has become a part of American serial killer lore. Alongside the acts of necrophilia and cannibalism that made him notorious, he also performed bizarre experiments to try and subjugate his victims. One of them was Errol Lindsay, a teenager he lured into his apartment. Dahmer sedated him, drilled a hole into his skull, and poured in hydrochloric acid, thinking it would turn him into a docile zombie. Incredibly, Lindsay survived this initial ordeal and woke up complaining of a headache before Dahmer strangled him. Another subject of his ghastly experiments was teenager Conrad Sinta. Like Lindsay, he survived having acid put into his skull, and even managed to leave the apartment when Dahmer had gone to buy more alcohol. Serial killers by IQ. Are most smarter or dumber than average? Serial killers' IQs ranked. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber's IQ was higher than Albert Einstein's. 3. He was caught red-handed and got away with it. Dazed and disorientated, Sinta was found on a street corner by 3 women. They promptly called the police, but Dahmer somehow managed to convince the officers that the boy was an adult and that they'd simply had a drunken lover's tiff. The women who'd originally found the victim were incredulous, but the police bought Dahmer's story completely. They didn't feel anything was amiss even when they accompanied Dahmer and Sinta back to the killer's flat, which stank of decaying flesh due to a previous victim lying in the bedroom. Satisfied that everything was fine, the officers left. Dahmer murdered Sinta straight afterwards. Personal photograph of John Wayne Gacy. 11 chilling facts about John Wayne Gacy. John Wayne Gacy, aka Pogo or Patch the Clown, killed and sexually assaulted at least 33 young men and boys in the 1970s. 4. He planned to turn his victims into an altar. When Dahmer was finally apprehended, he confessed he'd been planning to create an altar in his apartment, using the remains of his victims. It was a serious project for Dahmer. He later created a detailed sketch of the imagined altar, which would have consisted of a black table adorned with skulls and flanked by whole skeletons. For Dahmer, it would have been a meditative area, where he intended to sit on a black leather chair and bask in his bloodlust. Or, as he himself described it, it would be a place where I could cleanse my thoughts and feed my obsession. 5. He took a human head to work. Jeffrey Dahmer worked in a chocolate factory. His work life and grotesque private life did overlap when he took a victim's mummified head into work and stored it in his personal locker. That's how strong the compulsion was, that's how bizarre the desire was, he later explained in an interview. I wanted to keep something of the person with me. An ice pick lying ominously on the counter bar. 9 facts about Luca Magnotta and the murder of June Lin. How Luca Magnotta went from cat killer to cannibal and the trope of internet sleuths who tracked him down faster than law enforcement. 6. He was obsessed with Star Wars and The Exorcist 3. Jeffrey Dahmer's lethal urges can't easily be explained, but we do know they were there from a very young age. As a child, he had been fascinated by dead animals, and as a schoolboy, he'd fantasized about incapacitating a jogger and sexually assaulting him. He also claimed his first life just weeks after graduating high school, when he picked up and murdered a hitchhiker. It would therefore be incorrect to blame the perceived effects of pop culture for what he did. That said, it's certainly true that Dahmer psyched himself up to kill by watching certain movies. He relished the wickedness of the Emperor in Return of the Jedi, even going as far as wearing yellow contact lenses to resemble the Star Wars villain. Dahmer was also fixated on The Exorcist 3, which focuses on the horrific exploits of a supernatural serial killer. One victim who managed to escape remembered seeing The Exorcist 3 playing in the background. Dahmer himself spoke of the importance of the film, saying, "I felt so hopelessly evil and perverted that I actually derived a sort of pleasure from watching that tape." Thank you for watching Crimebusters 101. Please subscribe and hit that notification button. I also have a meditation channel which is great to unwind. I will leave a link below.